National Nutrition Events, the natural health experts, the latest natural health info. Meet award-winning doctor of naturopathic medicine, Jonathan Beatty. He's a graduate of the University of Guelph's Nutraceutical Science program and an expert in digestive health, detoxification, and the treatment of cancer to his patients at his Toronto area clinic. Working with supplement manufacturer Prairie Naturals, to his colleagues, he's a product educator and lecturer. Dr. Beatty formulates products and is a passionate supporter of patients' rights. He's also a National Nutrition Seminar speaker. Going gluten-free the easy way with award-winning naturopath Dr. Jonathan Beatty.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jonathan Beatty. I'm a naturopathic doctor. Speaking at these seminars has been just absolutely wonderful. The people are just, they're amazing. You know, they come out, everybody is there because they're genuinely, truly interested in bettering themselves. And it's really lovely to see, you know, such an inspired audience, and to be able to speak to them is quite an honor.
Thank you for having me. I hope seeing the gluten-free didn't get some of you worried that we're going to be doing the exact same talk we did last time I'm here. We are going to basically build off of last time's talk, so if you're here for that, great, you've got a great basis to go with. But don't worry, I won't be repeating myself too much. So for those of you who haven't seen me speak before, my name is Dr. Jonathan Beatty. And I'm going to give you a little bit of how I got into what I do, just so you have an idea of why I'm here standing before you speaking. So I went to the University of Guelph, and originally I went there to become a veterinarian. So I've just changed the type of animal I treat medically now. But really what happens is part of becoming a vet is you have to go through a nutrition class. And while I was there, I started to realize that the impact of the science of nutrition and just how much nutrition had to do with human health. So while I was there, I switched out of animal biology and I switched over into a course called Nutrition and Nutraceutical Science, which is unlike really any other nutrition program in the country, where it's designed really looking at specialty foods. If you've ever had your omega-3 eggs, those were developed at the University of Guelph. There's a lot of the major fish oil research that's happening in Canada is also happening there. And so it's a big hub for a lot of doctors and became a very inspiring program. What I learned out of that, though, was just how much, again, nutrition has to do with human health. So when I started looking at medical schools, and at this point I decided I wanted to treat people, the biggest part for me that I was looking for was how much nutritional training and how much work do they do with nutritional medicine, because that was where I wanted to specialize. And that's actually how I stumbled across naturopathic medicine. I had never seen a naturopath. I had barely even ever heard of one at that point in my life. But the one thing I found when I started researching it was that, unlike most med schools where you maybe do like 1 or 2 classes in nutrition, what we ended up doing was 6 hours of nutrition training a week for the entire 4 years of med school. So it was a very different approach to looking at, what fuels the healing of the human body, how's the human body trying to heal. And so that's what kind of brings me before you today, because a lot of what we also sort of practice is preventive medicine. And if I can get out here and inspire some people to make some changes, really, my goal of being here is not necessarily to recruit you. In fact, it's to give you some information so that you'll stay out of basically mine or every other doctor's office. What I'm trying to do is preach and teach the principles of healthy living. So that's what we're going to get into today. And last time I was here, what we spoke about was going gluten-free, because it's become such a popular change that people are making in order to feel better about themselves. And to actually feel not just about themselves emotionally, but feel better about themselves physically as well. And what people are looking for now is, strategies once they go gluten-free, what else can they now begin to do for themselves? One of the main reasons, and we'll touch on a little bit on gluten, and some of the main reasons why people are trying to avoid it. This is just a shameless self-promotion right here. This is just myself. A few of my credentials and a few of the things I'm passionate about. Some of them there, you'll notice, Canadian Association for Physicians for the Environment, basically a group of medical doctors, and actually a lot of naturopaths are in this gang. And just looking at it, again, what we're doing to our environment and how that's actually affecting patient health. And then, of course, both our provincial and national associations. And I do some work as well in formulation for a company called Prairie Naturals, because I'd like to tinker with nutritional products. So a little bit of what is gluten intolerance, just to bring people up to speed who missed last times. Basically, it's an allergy to a protein that's in a lot of different foods, mostly grains. You're looking at your wheat, your barley, your rye. I'm going to throw oats under the bus here. Mostly, most cases, oats, although there are gluten-free oats available. You're also looking at spelt, and then of course triticale and kamut, and you see all these other names on the back of packages, durum and semolina. Those are all different names of grains that can contain gluten. And what gluten is basically it's a protein in it. It's the glue. It's what makes your bread nice and moist and stick together. If you ever have a bread that's not made with a high gluten grain, most of the gluten-free breads, what you typically find is they tend to be very crumbly. Scientists aren't that exciting. We're not that innovative. Gluten basically came from the fact that it's like glue. It's sticky stuff. So it sticks to your ribs, and that's what makes bread nice and soft and sticky. Like when you see the Pillsbury commercials and they pull the croissant apart, and you see that's gluten right there. Trouble is, we don't digest it well. And so what ends up happening is it creates overactive immune responses, and it leads to nutrient malabsorption. This is a lot of what I spoke on last time. In some cases, it's celiac disease. This is not the majority of the population, but the people that suffer from celiac, they need to be 100% gluten-free. This is a very serious autoimmune condition. And in fact, one of the doctors who developed the term celiac disease, he's actually now trying to get it sort of reclassified, because what they're finding is that it's not actually catching enough people that are sensitive. It's such a very precise diagnosis that you basically need a positive, what they call colonoscopy, which is a biopsy from your intestines in order to be diagnosed. Whereas a lot of people are actually very sensitive to it, but their biopsy comes back negative. So now they're actually trying to change the terminology in order to include more people, not because they're trying to sell more gluten-free products, but actually because what they're finding is there's a lot of harm caused to people from gluten, and they're not being diagnosed because they're not getting that positive biopsy. And so like one study was done down in Acapulco, and they were looking at people with rheumatoid arthritis. And they actually found that 54% of the people with rheumatoid arthritis, when they did a blood test for them, came back celiac. And what they discovered once they removed gluten from those people's diets was that the rheumatoid arthritis went away. And so here you have an autoimmune joint condition that for some people, and again, that doesn't mean everybody with rheumatoid arthritis is a celiac, but there was a huge group of them that had this condition, and it's considered an autoimmune, which is your body's attacking your own joints. An autoimmune condition, and it was actually healed by these people avoiding gluten. So this is where we're trying to actually get some, some changes in how we're looking at and evaluating these diseases. And this is why I'm out here tonight, because a lot of people, they're like, well, I'm not celiac, therefore I can have a little gluten. And in actuality, I always find that it's worth at least trying to go gluten-free for a short term, because what I find with most of my patients is that's the number one change we're making, is the dietary change. That makes the biggest difference in their health. And then the other people are just the diagnosed gluten intolerant. These are positive blood tests without actually having the biopsy. So that's another huge chunk of the population that has that. They estimate about 1 in 10 Canadians or more is actually would blood test positive for a celiac disease. And undiagnosed gluten sensitivity, there's probably about 1 in 80. So for every person diagnosed with gluten intolerance, 80 more people are undiagnosed. That's how many people are out there. So the majority of the population has no idea they have this. And this is why I'm out trying to teach people that simply trying to go gluten-free may be all you need to do to figure out if you've got this. And it's not a very difficult test. You basically just cut all gluten out of your diet for 3 weeks, and if you feel better, chances are you're gluten intolerant. You don't need a much better barometer or test strip for it than that. If you find you make a change in your life that makes you feel better, I don't know why you need a doctor to tell you that it's right or wrong necessarily. And this is coming from the doctor's mouth. A lot of the times, you'll notice it, and it's not like there's any nutrient in a gluten-containing grain that your body needs. So if you do find that when you eliminate this, you feel better, that's a change that may just work for you. And so that's something that I always promote, is that if you try a dietary change like that and you feel better making that change, that to me is justification enough to follow that lifestyle. And I always say there's 6 billion people on Earth and there's 6 billion healthy diets. And the reason a lot of people don't notice when they have these sensitivities is, a lot of the times, yes, if you've got constipation, you've got diarrhea, you've got IBS, you've got heartburn, you're going to know you've got a digestive issue, and you're going to start looking at the food that you intake. But what a lot of people won't do is when they start to get away from your digestive system, well, they relate it to the food they eat. And this is probably the biggest problem we have, at least I see in medicine today. But also just in the way we approach medicine, or the way people approach their diseases, is because there is this disconnect between what we're putting in our mouths and how our bodies are feeling. So a lot of times you can see malnutrition or chronic low iron. That's a really good sign that people are malabsorbing, and we tend to do that because of inflammation. You see the weight loss, you see weight gain, you see weakness, fatigue, depression, ADHD. These are all different conditions that can actually be caused by the diet and actually be caused by inflammation from something we're eating. And as we go through, we see migraines, we see menstrual disorders, nerve damage and tingling. I had a patient who was coming to see me, and she has a condition known as trigeminal neuralgia. It's also known, it's sort of nicknamed in the medical world as the suicide disease, because the pain is so severe and it affects your face that it actually leads to a high rate of suicide amongst patients, because they literally aren't getting any relief no matter what they do. Painkillers don't tend to work very well for these patients, and so they tend to suffer a lot. We discovered she was, again, one of those crazy cases where it was celiac. As soon as we took gluten out of her diet, she was having attacks about every 3 days, and they just stopped. And they've only been back twice. Once when she had her son's birthday cake, and another time when she had a slice of pizza. And she paid for both of those. And she realized very quickly that was a very, very, very specific and quick motivation to stop consuming that. The trouble is, most of us, we don't have a disease called the suicide disease. So our motivation tends to not be quite as strong. This is where one of the biggest things I promote is we all ultimately have a time limit. We have an expiration date. We don't know when it is. The biggest thing we're trying to do, though, is, and what I always try and inspire in my patients is, until you get there, whenever it may be, you want to live as sort of fulfilled a life as you can. And the way to do that is basically not let ill health get in the way of being able to go out and enjoy your day. Whether you've got grandchildren or whether you are grandchildren to somebody and you want to hang out with your grandparents. If you need to be well in order to do these things. And so in order to, sort of live a fulfilled life, that's really the idea of why we want to, take as good care of our body as we can, because that's, in a way, the only way that we can really be fulfilled. Anybody who looks at what they call the hierarchy of needs, having money gives you a certain amount of, personal growth, but ultimately our social relationships and our health and our personal security, they actually fall much, much higher on what a human's needs are than do all sorts of other things. And as far as finding, sort of true happiness, one major thing that we see that's really needed, and why I kind of try and come out here and promote it, is, a healthy body. It's one of the basic needs of human life and human happiness. So we look at all of these different conditions. We're seeing skin issues, we're seeing generalized poor health. What we need to do now is, now that we've eliminated the food or the gluten that's causing the problem, the next step is to actually allow our bodies to heal. And this we got into a little bit last time, but now we're going to get into it in a lot more detail. And we're going to go through it in a number of steps, and there is an actual reason why we do the steps in this order. Number one, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail, but we're basically going through to number one is to cleanse our bodies. Okay, so our bodies every day, we create metabolic waste products. You eat food, your body burns that food, and as it's burning that food, and like anything you burn, it creates ash, it creates smoke, it creates all sorts of different things that your body has to eliminate. all the basic byproducts of metabolism. So you bring food in and you eliminate food out. And so we want to make sure that the net flow of toxins in our body is actually outwards. And the reason for that is toxins are basically anything that impedes or impairs the normal human function. That's what we consider a toxin or a poison. These are things that block the way our body's trying to work and the way our body wants to work. So in order to heal, we have to get rid of the things that are going to block the way our body normally will heal. We then need to balance pH. And one of the main reasons we need to do this is because our body functions and chemical reactions happen at the right and correct pH. So if we don't have a balanced pH, we can't expect a lot of the healing processes in our bodies to actually function at the right or happen at the right speed, because the speed of the chemical reactions is going to be determined by the pH. As soon as you change the pH of something, for instance, if somebody went outside and they put a little baking soda in your car battery, and you're going to get rid of that battery acid, you're not going to be able to start your car. Why? Because we changed the pH of the liquid that's in it, and that's going to change how that battery works. But your body is very similar. Next, we're going to repair and rebuild. Okay, because once you've done chronic damage to your system, you need to now repair that. If you've been doing something to your body for, say, 40 years, you can't just expect that if you stop it one day, it's going to completely undo itself. That's not quite how it's going to work. Then we need to support digestion. The reason we need to do this is because ultimately, in order to liberate all the nutrients your body needs to heal, you need to have a healthy digestive tract. Now, the 3 steps before that are involved in actually getting us to where we can then support digestion. Next, we need to heal inflammation. So that's any sort of ongoing insult or any ongoing problem that's continuing to cause harm to our body. We need to get rid of that, because otherwise we're going to end up with a net loss again. We're going to end up inflamed. We're going to end up breaking down. What we're trying to do is rebuild. And last but not least, once our body's functioning well, we need to nourish it to keep it that way. Because if we don't give it the tools it needs to constantly rebuild itself and the tools it needs to stay healthy, ultimately we're going to end up back needing step 1 again. And so this is where, by following these 6 simple steps, we can basically go through almost like an algorithm of, fix A, fix B, fix C, fix D, E, and F. And by the time you get that, you get to the good life, G. So step 1 is cleansing. Okay, this is probably, to me, one of the most important things around. There was a study put out, I believe it was 2003, and it was called, 2007, it was called Toxic Nation. And it was a report, and what they basically did was they went and they polled the current leaders at the time. So I think it was Dalton McGuinty, John Tory, and I can't quite remember, and Jack Layton. And they were the 3 heads of the provincial parties at that time. And what they did was they went to them, and they asked them for some blood and for some urine. And these politicians, along with a bunch of other random individuals that they polled, gave over some blood and urine. And what they did was they studied them for about 97 different toxins. And what they found was the average person has about 75 toxins in them. And these were toxins that were known carcinogens, neurotoxins, things that basically were very harmful to human health. And they found it didn't matter who they were surveying, whether they were taking the blood from, a farmer, somebody who lives up north, John Tory, who's a politician who lives, right downtown in the city. All these people, it didn't matter where they got them from. They were all loaded with these toxic pesticides. They were all loaded with these toxic chemicals that were impairing the way in which their bodies worked. And it was interesting that it didn't matter, who you were, what age you were, everybody had these exposures. There's about 60,000 chemicals right now that are banned in Europe for sale. You're not allowed to use them, that we allow for use in Canada. It's quite amazing. There was a big controversy just happened. There was a sub sandwich company, I won't name names, but there was a plasticizer found in their bread. I can't remember exactly the country, so don't quote me, but I believe it's Indonesia, where if you got caught putting that in your food, it was 14 years in jail and over a $400,000 fine. That's how toxic they considered it. Totally allowed in your food here. That's the amazing part. It wasn't like they got caught and they were going to get in trouble for it. The only reason they're even going to remove it is because the media storm, that basically the public outcry from that when we discovered that there was plastic in our bread. The same thing you use to make a yoga mat. is used to make your sandwich. All right, and so that's, I wouldn't eat my yoga mat either. And so that's the type of things we're trying to eliminate from our body. We're trying to make the net flow of toxins to be outside of our body. So one of the things I usually recommend is people to, start with at least a 7-day cleanse. Depending on how much your body can handle and how toxic you are, you may need to do more, you may need to do less. But just as at the same rate that you brought the toxins in slow and steady, you want to bring the toxins out somewhat slow and steady as well. And part of the reason is most people, when they do a detox, they feel like absolute garbage. And the reason for that is their bodies are eliminating absolute garbage. And so you're bringing that back into circulation. When you get exposed to a toxin, it doesn't stay in your blood long. It quickly goes to your other tissues and it hides. Your body tries to get it out of the productive circulation. What a 7-day cleanse does is it basically stimulates your body to put that back into the bloodstream. And if it's designed well, it should also stimulate your body to break those chemical toxins down and eliminate them. I'm going to use alcohol as the example here. And part of the reason is because most people in this room have probably experienced the toxic effects of alcohol and just how it works. And they understand what a hangover is, which is usually the easiest thing to teach. So how a hangover works is you ingest alcohol, and in some cases there's certain alcohols that are known for worse hangovers, such as red wine. And the reason red wine gives you a worse hangover than normal alcohol is it's wood casked. And what happens when you put wine in a wood cask is you create not just ethanol, which is the alcohol we like to get drunk on, methanol, the alcohol we don't want to get drunk on. Because what methanol does is it breaks down into our body and it forms formaldehyde. Yes, we all know that from good old grade 10 science class, where we had to cut open the frog. And yes, and that's also part of where we get the term pickling your liver. So if you tend to drink too much, that's also where that phrase comes from, because you're literally pickling your liver. So the next thing your body then needs to do is it needs to go through that next phase and break formaldehyde down into another chemical that your body can then excrete. And so this is the next phase of detoxification. So you need to make sure that this is happening, because otherwise you get a buildup of those toxins in your body. And so this is why we support herbal cleansing, or we support our body with herbal cleansing. So the reason we do a 7-day cleanse is because, again, we're supporting the natural detoxification systems. And for all those that don't know, they are your lungs, your liver, your kidney, and your skin. 2 things you never want to do. Nobody ever wants to push toxins out of their lungs. So you don't see a lot of lung cleanses, because if you do, you can actually create irritation and you can get sick. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't see a lot of skin cleanses, because nobody ever wants to push toxins out of their skin. And the reason for that is most people are doing a cleanse to eliminate the eczema, psoriasis, acne, and other skin rashes they've got. Those are often a side effect of your liver not being good enough at its job. And when toxins begin to accumulate, your body will start to use your skin more as a detoxification system. And that's where a lot of skin conditions will come from. They're not usually, it's funny because we often lather creams on them, expecting them to go away for long periods of time, when in actuality, the problem is internal, coming out through our skin. And so a lot of the times it's internal cleansing we need to do in order to eliminate a lot of these skin conditions. So the other thing we need to do while we're doing this is minimize the amount of toxins in, because we're trying to create a net flow out of our bodies. And so in order to do that, some of the easy things to do are eating low on the food chain, or mostly plants. Why? Because they're easy to digest and they tend to have a lot of the chemicals in them that the body needs to actually break these toxins down. The other thing we want to do is, again, eating unrefined organic foods. Why? Because the refinement of food actually usually involves heat and involves all sorts of various processes that can damage the very chemicals that our body needs from the food in order to detoxify. And what this will do is ultimately it will retrain your taste buds, so that wheatgrass shot that you used to gag at actually becomes quite tasty. And one of the things I've always liked with doing a 7-day cleanse, and I always make all of my patients do, is before they do it, they need to do a 7-day dietary change. And the reason they do that, I make them do that before they start taking any cleanse product, is this. Most people will take the cleanse product and then they will feel, they'll feel absolutely garbage, and they'll blame the product for that. When I get them to do just the diet first for that first week, what they realize is that horrible feeling they have is a food addiction. And it's actually an addiction to inflammation, where your body will actually crave the very foods that are harming you. And it's a very interesting process for people to go through. And a lot of the times I find that just by doing that initial dietary change, they'll actually go through a little bit of a detox purge at the beginning. Then I have them support with the 7-day cleanse so they can see the difference between what's a food addiction and what might actually be a side effect of taking a herbal supplement. The next thing we need to do is we need to really speed up our detoxification system. And this is something I've added into all my detox protocols with all my patients. And the reason I've done this is because I do a lot of environmental medicine. And the more I'm around it, the more I really see just how many toxins we're exposed to without even knowing. I had to have a discussion with a lady today because we discovered that her mercury levels were 20 times the normal limit. And she's had a number of nerve problems and a number of immune problems. And one of the interesting things that we discovered, we have no idea where her exposures came from, but she's one of the highest mercury cases I've ever seen. And doesn't have a mercury amalgam. That's the other thing. So she's accumulated this somewhere else. So we have no idea where she got it from, but it's absolutely becoming just, a lot of my practice is environmental medicine. So a lot of what I get into is chelation, because when you see somebody that has levels of toxins like that, we need to get them out of the body. And toxins like that don't leave very easily. They get in very easily, but they don't like to leave. And so what we need to do is support that. So if you've got a pond and a truck drives by and it hits a pothole and it flips over and it spills its toxic load into your pond, and now you need to clean it up, the way you're going to do that is you're going to go out and you're going to get a big canister of chlorella, live chlorella, and you're going to dump it into your pond. And what these little algae do is they'll actually swim around and they'll actually suck up all of the toxins. And then you can come in, skim off the chlorella, put it back in the tub, and then what you've actually done is purified that water again, because it basically acts like little toxin sponges. And obviously, depending on how much toxin is spilled, you're going to need a little bit more chlorella to clean it up. It does the exact same thing in the human body. That's the interesting thing with chlorella that we've learned, is that simply by ingesting it, we can basically use it like a toxic sponge to clean our systems up. So it's a freshwater green phytoplankton, so basically algae. It's this little green stuff. It smells like a swamp. So don't expect that this is going to taste like blueberries. But it's one of the highest concentrations of chlorophyll of any plant. It's a well-proven detoxifier. It improves fat metabolism, and this is probably because it just gets things out of the way. It improves cardiovascular health, it improves immunity. It's one of these sort of, I want to call it a vegetable, but it's like a wonder vegetable that just seems to, basically get rid of all, or improve all aspects of human health. And again, probably because it's getting rid of these toxic compounds that get in the way of the normal function. And so when you've got something blocking the normal function, your body tends to create inflammation. So why this seems to get rid of inflammation is because it seems to just unblock those processes. So it's rich in proteins, it's rich in vitamins. And then the other one that you've got is something called spirulina. Spirulina is like chlorella's brother. And again, spirulina does a lot of the exact same things. And this one's known as blue-green algae. This one tends to be a little bit more nutritive. But I use a lot of sea vegetables with my patients because what they actually do is they provide a lot of the minerals and cofactors for all of the detoxification processes to occur in the body. So again, you're looking at high levels of minerals, beta carotene, and this one's actually been shown to not only boost immunity and cleanse and as an antioxidant, but radiation protection. So this is why I look at a combination of the two. Unfortunately, the one topic that's starting to become a lot more popular is the Fukushima ordeal, which is basically nuclear waste is spilling into the ocean. And it's slowly spreading around the globe. So one of the things that I have had concerns from patients about is, of course, if we're getting a lot of our food from the West Coast, because when we think about it, actually, a lot of our food that we buy at the grocery store is grown in California and Mexico. And a lot of the fish we eat also comes from that neighborhood. What ends up happening is we need to start worrying about, unfortunately, radiation. And one of the interesting things that spirulina seems to be able to do is it seems to actually block the accumulation of radiation in the body. Another big thing, and it's unfortunate Terry Willard won't be here next month, but I know he's a big fan as well, is mushrooms will also do that. And no need to get overly fancy. I've even seen studies that show your generic button mushroom is quite capable of absorbing radiation and protecting your body from it. So now that we've cleansed and we've gotten rid of all these toxic chemicals that are blocking the way our bodies work, the next thing we need to do is balance the body's pH. This one's very important. This, to me, is going to be sort of the way that human health and medicine is going to move in the future. And part of the reason for that is it's been all the rage in Europe for about the last 20 years. I find Europe tends to be a lot further ahead of us with regards to sort of new methods of medicine and looking at major changes that you can do to populations to prevent people from needing hospitals, to prevent people from needing doctors. Unfortunately, we're creating bigger and bigger demands for these, but in the interest of public health, in the interest of keeping you guys out of our offices, one of the things we need to look at is how is disease created? And one of the sort of key underlying factors that we're seeing is that an acidic body pH allows for disease to occur. When you've got an area of inflammation, you'll typically find acid. When you've got an area of cancer, a lot of the time, again, you'll typically find an acidic pH. Now, it is a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario. We're not sure which comes first. The one thing we have seen, though, is when you correct that tissue pH, you will correct the condition. And so this is one of the major areas where we're looking at managing body pH as a way to manage chronic disease. So when you are acidic, your cells will actually transport 20 times less oxygen than normal. So what this means is you'll actually impair how your body's able to feed itself. And this is, again, the way in which enzymes change protein. So if you've ever taken a piece of lemon and you've gone to marinate some fish with it, and you leave it on the fish for too long, when you come back, your fish will be cooked because the lemon will, the acid in the lemon will actually have denatured the protein. You can technically cook an egg just by leaving it in vinegar because the acids of the vinegar will slowly denature the proteins over time, and you'll see the egg whites actually will begin to become solid. And that's because acid will unfold proteins. And what it does is it changes the way your hemoglobin carries oxygen. So the other thing that happens when your pH is wrong, you don't have enough stomach acid. And when you don't have enough stomach acid, you're not able to bind minerals. You're not able to absorb minerals. Then you get liver congestion. Because what actually drives digestion is when you've got stomach acid, is when you have enough stomach acid, it will trigger the sphincter to open that lets food empty out of your stomach and into your intestines. It will also trigger the release of bile, which is what your body needs to do to absorb fats. It will trigger the release of enzymes, which your body needs to digest your food. And so if you're not having adequate stomach acid leaving your stomach, you don't get the bile, you don't get the enzymes, and what you end up getting is a lot of fermentation, where the bacteria in your gut digest your food for you because you can't. And you get the other thing you get is indigestion, because your food's not going to be moving through your system the way it needs to. It's going to ferment, it's going to cause a lot of gas production, it's going to cause overgrowth of bad bacteria, and it's going to cause a lot of inflammation. And so then you get intestinal inflammation, and that cannot heal, and the mucosal lining of your digestive tract becomes compromised. The interesting thing with that is some research is now starting to show that the one sort of key underlying factor in almost every autoimmune condition is leaky gut. So we're seeing people where they've got the mucosal lining of their digestive tract is damaged. And that seems to be one of the key components we're seeing in a lot of autoimmune conditions. That's conditions where the body attacks itself. And it changes the way in which the immune system works. And then ultimately what you end up with is constipation, diarrhea, and congested bowels, which are not fun for anybody experiencing them. So the next thing you need to do, so of course the thing we need to do is balance our pH. One of the easiest ways to do this is with lemon and aloe. So how many people here own an aloe plant? Not nearly as many as I expected, not gonna lie. And where do you keep your aloe plant? In the window of what room? Of your living room. I never get the answer I'm looking for when I ask this question. It's the kitchen. I always expect that. I grew up in my house, we always had an aloe plant in the kitchen, and the reason the aloe plant always stayed in the window in the kitchen was if you burn yourself, you snap off the aloe, and I guess I just come from a house of clumsy cooks, I'm not really sure, but we always had aloe handy in case we burnt ourselves, because what it'll do is it'll soothe and heal an irritated mucosal tract, or an irritated membrane. So if your intestines are inflamed and your intestines are irritated, taking aloe internally will actually help balance that. So what you can do is you can actually make a drink using about the juice of half a lemon or half an organic lemon juice, or 1 ounce, however you want to say it. And then the other thing is 30 milliliters or an ounce of organic aloe vera juice. So you're using the lemon and the aloe vera together. Now, a lot of people are probably sitting there going, he was just talking about getting rid of acids, and yet I'm asking you to put lemon into your water. This is an interesting phenomenon. If you add acid into the stomach, it will actually secrete more acid, and this will actually make your body more alkaline. I know that's a complicated process to follow, and I have trouble explaining this even to some doctors because it actually gets into quite a complex series of chemical reactions. But trust me when I say this, when you add the lemon juice into the stomach, what it actually does is it causes more secretion of stomach acid. The acid in your stomach is neutralized by the food you eat. So you don't reabsorb that acid. So that acid ends up getting kicked out of the body, because anything in your stomach, although it's in the physical barrier of your body, is actually in a hollow tube that runs from your mouth to the other end, but is actually technically outside of your body. So anything that you put that gets secreted into the intestine or into the stomach gets is actually excreted out of the body. And so this actually allows our body to become more alkaline. Every time we drink it, we lose a little bit more acid out of our system, and we begin to alkalinize more and more. That raises our pH. And then the other thing I often will have people put in this is a little bit of Celtic sea salt. The reason we use Celtic sea salt is Celtic sea salt has a lot of what I like to call the je ne sais quoi minerals. So these are the I don't know what's. What they do is there are all sorts of minerals like potassium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and these are the minerals your body actually uses to balance your pH. When you take in table salt, it actually is very acid forming for your body. However, when you take in sea salt, it actually becomes very alkalinizing for the body. And so this is why I always have people use sea salt, because although they both say salt in them, one actually is acid forming and one is alkaline forming. And so you always want to be taking the one that's alkaline forming. And then you just add a nice little sprig of mint so it looks like the picture, and off you go to the beach. The next thing you want to do is, of course, we talked about repairing and rebuilding. This is a really important part. This is my favorite part. I'm a junkie for this part of the process. I do this in my practice almost every day with people, and really the big key here is we need to repair the gut. Why? Because everything you take, your medicines will be absorbed better. Your supplements will be absorbed better. So you're going out and you're spending all this money on vitamins, but unless you're able to actually absorb them, you're wasting a lot of them. I've actually seen x-rays of people where you can see their calcium pills, and there's 2 from today, 2 from yesterday, and 2 from the day before that. And they're on the x-ray. And you're looking inside at this person, you're trying to figure out, what's going on with them. Well, the process is too slow, is basically what's happening. The other trouble is, there's calcium tablets that have been sitting in this person's colon for 2 days, and they're still like pills. You can still tell exactly what they are. They haven't been broken down. So that's a problem. So this is where when you have healthy digestion, that doesn't happen, and that's the important part. So one of my favorite things to use ever is L-Glutamine powder. The reason for this is L-Glutamine is fuel for muscle, as well as it provides structure to muscle. So you repair the structure and you feed it all at the same time. And why is this important? Why is it so important to do this to muscle? Because your intestine is a big 26-foot long tubular muscle. And so in order to repair it, we have to treat it like a muscle. It squeezes all day long. It's spending its whole time contracting and relaxing, squeezing food back and forth through you. Food doesn't just go one way in your intestine. A lot of people think that. Your body actually pushes it down one way, pushes it back, pushes it down, pushes it back, pushes it down, pushes it back. This is why people, I'm going to get a little gross here and talk bowel movements. This is why people, when they get constipated, get the little round rabbit pellet stool. It's because your body basically pushes the stool back and forth so many times that it becomes a little ball. Okay, so that's a good sign that you don't have adequate transit time. And there's probably a few people in the audience going, I've seen that before. And that's what that is. So what we need is we need to support this muscle. We need to make sure it's doing its job well so we don't get the little rabbit pellets. And so what glutamine does is it heals the digestive tract and it keeps it from becoming permeable. So this is where we're getting rid of those autoimmune conditions. We're actually healing up the gut. We're healing up the lining to create the barrier to prevent bacteria from getting in and to allow for adequate digestion of our foods. It speeds wound healing. So some of the highest requirements for things like L-Glutamine, people who have been burned, people who have lost limbs. Why? Because they've got big wounds that they need to heal. And so that's why it's a really important one. Again, your intestines, they're 26 feet long. If you were to stretch them out, they would cover 2 full tennis courts if you stretched out every fold. There is a lot of surface area there you need to repair. And in order to do that, you need a lot of protein, you need a lot of glutamine. So this is one of my favorite ones, and again, because you'll see it enhances the immune system, stimulates the synthesis of proteins, repairs muscles and tissues. So a very, very important nutrient. Now this is just one amino acid. An amino acid is a building block, it's a part of a protein. And in order for your body to really use it though, you need complete protein. So you need not just glutamine, although glutamine you need a majority of, you actually need a whole bunch of other amino acids too. The places we get these are from our proteins. So I'm a big fan, for people that have digestive issues, I'm a really big fan of hemp protein. And the reason I'm such a big fan of hemp protein is this point right here, edestin and albumin globular proteins. Without getting overly technical to you, most proteins need to be straightened out and then chopped up into their individual amino acids. You don't normally absorb a protein as a whole protein. You will break it up and you'll absorb it only as amino acids. Hemp is the exception to the rule. Hemp proteins can actually be absorbed whole. Even if your digestion is absolutely terrible, your body can use hemp protein. And this is why it's so important for people that are having these digestive issues, because the trouble is they're taking all sorts of protein, but then their body can't digest it and they can't use it. So this is one of the reasons I'm a big promoter of hemp, is because especially somebody who's got digestive issues, you need to be a protein that you can actually absorb. And one of the interesting things is it also is known as promoting growth in infants and children. So it's actually used medically for kids that have what we call failure to thrive. So children that don't grow well, and that's usually because of a type of malnourishment, whether their intestines don't work well or for other reasons, they do very, very well on hemp protein. And so it's actually used in some hospitals to help children grow. It's also anti-inflammatory and it's also cardioprotective. And the reason for that, a lot of it is it's high in the very good fats. It's high in something called gamma-linolenic acid. Some women will use that to balance their hormones as well. And it's also very high in fiber, and this is what we use to manage cholesterol. So it's a really good sort of overall blended food. And the next thing we look at, this is my personal favorite, is rice protein. And the reason I'm such a big fan of rice protein is I'm allergic to dairy. Okay, part of how I ended up a naturopath was discovering that I was allergic to dairy and realizing that was the cause of my asthma and my eczema. So once I cut dairy out of my diet, I had to find a new protein. And the trouble is whey, which is a dairy protein, is considered one of the best proteins around. I'm allergic to, so I couldn't use it. So I had to find a similar protein that was just as good. And that led me to sprouted brown rice protein. And the reason for that is I always call this one vegetarian, the vegetarian's way. Most vegetarian proteins lack a specific amino acid. It's what's called an essential amino acid. Why it's essential is that your body can't make it. And then most vegetarian proteins have a limiting amino acid, which is the one amino acid it doesn't have enough of. So it's like getting a model kit and it only having, a model kit for a car and it only having 3 wheels. And you finally get your model kit put together and you go to put the tires on and then you realize you've only got 3 tires and it sits crooked on the shelf. Okay, that's that limiting amino acid. In that case, it's the tire. That's what limits you from finishing the project. Well, same thing in your body. If you have a limiting amino acid, your body will make the protein, and then when it can't make a finished product, it will tear it all apart again, and it'll start again. And it'll just keep doing this until you give it the amino acid it needs. So this is why it's so important that we have all the essential amino acids. It's the same quality as whey. Okay, not a lot of vegetarian proteins are like this, and this is why I'm such a big fan. hypoallergenic. Again, I'm the one with the dairy allergy, so I quite appreciated that I wasn't allergic to this one. And highly digestible. And that's that other key, that is a very high absorption rate, whereas not all proteins can be absorbed to the same level. And then once we do that, we need to support digestion. And this is what I spend most of my day doing. Regardless of what I'm treating, I'm always treating the digestive tract. And the reason for that is it's the gateway to health. When it's not working well, it doesn't matter what I give you, it's not going to get into you. And so the importance of digestive enzymes are huge. And a part of this is, especially even when we talk about gluten, so some people who are not celiacs don't do well when they eat gluten. And the reason for this is if they can't digest and break it down, it sits in their gut and it gets fermented. And what happens when it doesn't get digested and it gets fermented is gluten can become something called gluteomorphin. Or casein, which is a dairy protein, can become caseomorphin. Now, a few of you might recognize the last name of that molecule, which is morphine. These are opiates. They basically behave like heroin. Okay, so this is where your food addictions can sometimes come from. You're literally addicted to your food because of the improper digestion of it. You create what we call opiopeptides. And these things actually behave in your brain like a drug. I've seen children with severe versions of this and they look stoned. Their pupils are actually dilated like somebody who's high. It's an absolutely interesting thing. And when we treat them, we make them go gluten-free, one of the first ways we can tell we're making progress with them is you'll see their pupils change, which is one of the first things you see when a drug addict is coming down. It's a really interesting phenomenon to see in people. The other thing is it promotes healthy mucosal lining. Again, this is protecting against infection, and this is protecting against that leaky gut. If you're not having the fermentation, you don't have the production of these toxic products, you don't get the inflammation. And it aids in the absorption of key nutrients, because again, we're still trying to rebuild our body. And in order to do that, we need the building blocks. We need the tools. If we don't have the tools, we don't get the building blocks out of our diet, we're not able to actually heal and undo the damage that's been done. It controls bacterial overgrowth. I feel like I'm shooting fish in a barrel sometimes at my office, where almost everybody that walks in, as soon as they say digestive concern to me, one of the things we'll do is we'll test them, and I would say 9 out of 10 times we find an overgrowth of different types of bacteria and different types of yeast that shouldn't be there. And it's amazing how many people it affects. I can't lie, I've been a victim once myself. I tested myself and I found out, wow, here's the doctor, and I had to treat myself. So, it was one of those things where I was seeing it in my patients all the time and I just assumed I didn't have it. But I decided I would test it just for fun one day. And lo and behold, I ended up needing a treatment myself. So, even those of us who try and take good care of ourselves, we can still get caught by this one. And again, healthy digestion will also protect against allergens and lactose intolerance. So some people really struggle with milk and they have it their whole life. What can happen is lactase. So lactase is the enzyme your body needs to break down the lactose in milk. It breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose. And if you don't have this enzyme, that sugar doesn't get absorbed and it causes a huge influx of water into your intestines. And anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour after you take in something with lactose, you better make a run to the bathroom because it's coming out. Okay, that's what lactose intolerance is. It's a very, very uncomfortable disease for anybody who has it. Now, lactase, the enzyme that breaks this lactose down and stops this problem from happening, exists in the intestine. It actually is on the wall of the intestine. But if the walls of the intestine are damaged, there's no lactase. So all of a sudden, you become sensitive to milk, even though you shouldn't necessarily be sensitive to it. And the reason you become sensitive is you don't digest it. That inflammation blocks the production of lactase, and all of a sudden, even something, like milk will start to harm you. And so this is where it becomes that healthy digestion breeds healthy digestion. And when you've got inflammation, you've got sick digestion, it actually makes more indigestion and more problems occur. So one of the things you'll often want to do, especially early on, I'm not big on enzymes every single day. The trouble with that is if you take enzymes every single day for the rest of your life, your body's very lazy, and if you constantly give it enzymes, it'll say, well, look, if you're just going to give these to me, I'm not going to waste any energy making them. And so if you do use them for longer than 6 weeks at one time, there is a chance that you can become a little bit dependent on them, and it will take you some time to wean off of them. And the reason for that is that your body will actually slow its own production of enzymes down. That being said, in short term, I'm a very big fan of them. And in my practice with my patients, I will supervise them on use longer than 6 weeks, but they also have to be taken off of them specially. But a good enzyme should do a lot of things. Now, our diets tend to be quite varied. I know there's probably 1 or 2 people in the room that doesn't eat a whole lot. Pasta and chicken is pretty much all they consume. But for the average person, they eat a variety of fruits and vegetables, a variety of nuts and seeds, a variety of meats. There's all sorts of these different foods we eat. And in order to break those down, we need a variety of different enzymes. Our body makes hundreds of them. And so when we're looking for an enzyme product to supplement with, that's the thing we're trying to mimic the most. It's not necessarily about having the highest dose as it is about having the widest variety. And the reason for that is different foods contain different sugars. So there's an old song my grandfather taught me, and it was, beans are good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you break wind. That's because beans contain 2 sugars, stachyose and raffinose. And what those sugars are is they're very difficult for humans to digest. So they tend to be fermented. And anytime bacteria ferment things, they create gas as a byproduct. And so that's the ending to the song. And this is where you can get specific enzymes that will actually break those down. The same thing, some people will find that same problem. They have cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. These are what are called the brassica family of vegetables. They have a type of, they require a special type of enzyme called alpha-galactosidase. So alpha-galactosidase can actually help break the sugars in those vegetables down. And so depending on, again, the type of diet you have, you need a broad spectrum enzyme. And then the one that I really like is things that have fiberzyme. What this is it's called a cellulase. So it's something that breaks down cellulose, which is the fiber of plants. Humans cannot digest it. Okay, the way we get through it is we chew. And probably the biggest thing I find lacking with most of my patients, and I'm even guilty of it myself sometimes when I'm in a rush, is we don't chew our food adequately. And because of this, we don't actually release all of the nutrients. And so a cheat you can use is to use something that has fiberzyme in it, because what fiberzyme does is it breaks down the cellulose. And so if you don't chew a food properly, it kind of chemically chews it for you while it's in your stomach. And this will help to release more of the actual nutrition from the food you eat. And so that's why I find out of all enzymes, that's kind of one of the key components that I look for, is something that actually has a cellulase and something called hemicellulase. And the reason for that is it will continue to break down your food for you even if you don't chew it well. And that releases more of the nutrition out of it. Then if you're going gluten-free, the other thing you want to look for is something that has DPP4 activity. This is getting a little technical. It's a gluten digestive aid. This is the enzyme that will break down gluten. It breaks down pretty much any complex carbohydrate, and it'll also break down milk. It'll break down a number of different proteins that the body has difficulty breaking down. And so this is where something that's got this activity is very important. And there's a lot of different places you can get it. And it's interesting because not only will it break down gluten, it will also reduce inflammation. It will also actually help repair the intestines. And so this is one that I will often put when I make somebody go gluten-free. I will often put them on an additional enzyme just to clean out any sort of latent gluten. Because remember, we did discuss gluten is like glue. And even though you stop eating it one day, you don't completely evacuate every time you go to the bathroom. And so what ends up happening is you can actually have residual gluten stuck in your body for weeks. And so taking an enzyme like this will basically go down. It does the clean sweep. It gets rid of any of the gluten remnants that are in your intestines. It helps lower autoimmune responses. However, it is not an excuse to eat gluten if you are sensitive. This is not a free pass for a celiac to go to Pizza Hut. Sorry guys, you're probably never going to taste that again unless they come up with a gluten-free recipe. But it does help if you are exposed. So myself, when I travel, I actually use this for my dairy allergy because it'll help break down dairy too. So if I'm eating somewhere, like if I go to a wedding or I go somewhere where, I don't necessarily, I can't trust the food. And if I do get a little bit of milk in it because they accidentally, put butter on it and then scraped it off real quickly because they knew I didn't want butter on it, that's going to make me feel horrible. They don't mean to do it intentionally, so what I do when I can't control my food is I'll often take one of these first. And the reason for that is even if I do get caught, as I say, it will really reduce the sort of severity of my sensitivity. So it's a really important one. And naturally can be found in kiwis of all places. So your other option, if you don't have this handy, is eat about 6 kiwis and it'll do about the same. But if you're yeah, and 6 kiwis is not actually even equal to a single capsule, but it takes about that many to get enough of this enzyme for it to work. Now next we talked about pH. pH. I'm really, really, really big on this one because if you don't have the enzymes at the right pH, it's not going to work. So one of the other things you want to look for in an enzyme is betaine HCl. Why this is important is because it's basically acid. This is what's going to get the enzymes to the right pH so that they will work. And then if you don't take an enzyme, but you just want to make sure that your own digestive enzymes work, one of the things you can do is you can actually take betaine HCl pills. So you can actually take stomach acid as a pill. And what it will do is it'll actually stimulate your own natural stomach acid to be produced again. Most heartburn is actually caused by low stomach acid, not high. What ends up happening is you have a little sphincter, you have a little circular muscle at the end, at the top of your stomach. 2 things will make it close: stretch and acid. But if you don't have enough acid, you can still have the little acid that you do have float back up and get caught in your esophagus. This is going to cause a lot of pain. It's going to cause heartburn, even though it's enough acid to burn the esophagus, but it's not enough acid to actually trigger that muscle to close. And so this is often where if you can increase the stomach acid, then when the acid goes to flow back up, it actually sets off the sensor and will actually close that little muscle. And so this will actually get rid of heartburn. And it's amazing how many times I treat patients for heartburn. And I would say 9 out of 10 patients I treat for heartburn is low stomach acid, not high. Even though an antacid will help because you go from low to no acid. Trouble with that is it will actually impair how the enzymes work, it'll impair the digestion of your food, and it will impair the absorption of minerals. They actually don't recommend that you use antacids frequently, and part of the reason is it impairs calcium absorption. And so it leads over time to the development of things like osteoporosis. It impairs iron absorption, so it leads over time to the development of anemia. So this is why you're not supposed to take antacids for a long time. And it's interesting, a lot of acid blockers, they actually have right in the box, do not take for longer than 6 weeks. And I've seen people that are on them 20 years. My own father, I think, was on them 15 years before I figured that out. And once I caught him, we took dairy out of his diet and his heartburn went away. And then we repaired his, and then we used stomach acid to repair his acid response. And now he no longer needs his medications. So it is the type of thing that you can heal from. So what betaine does is it activates pepsin, it encourages the flow of bile and pancreatic enzymes, sterilizes the stomach, so it prevents those infections because you give yourself enough acid, that's a good barrier to infection. It prevents pathogenic overgrowth, it decreases inflammation, and look at what it assists in the absorption of. So when we start talking about all these nutrients that we're taking and all these things we're trying to get into our body to heal, if we don't have the acid, we don't get the calcium and magnesium. We can't rebuild our bones. We can't regulate how our arteries work. We don't have the zinc and we don't have the iron, so we can't carry oxygen. We can't repair our hair and nails. We don't have the B vitamins, especially B12, so we have zero energy. We lack the ability to break down toxins. We run out of simple vitamin C. Vitamin C, you actually need some acid to absorb. And then, of course, beta-carotene, which is your provitamin A. It's a plant source of vitamin A. And so once we do all this digestion, the next step is we need to heal inflammation. So, my alma mater, University of Guelph, first thing I'm going to talk about every time, omega-3 fats. And the reason for that is they are the basis behind which all inflammation is created. Your body, in order to create inflammation, pretty much what it does is it breaks down fats, and it uses fats as signals. And it makes these signals that say either we're going to get inflamed or we're not going to get inflamed. Basically, it either sends invitations to the inflammation party or it calls the party off. Okay? There's no sort of great middle ground here. So what omega-3s do is they call off the inflammation party. They basically go around and uninvite everybody. And so this helps manage the inflammation. This keeps the party to a minimum. Okay, it doesn't get the police called. And so what it does is it manages the inflammation. It reduces the development of pretty much every chronic disease. So it's been shown to help with diabetes. It's been shown to help with arthritis, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's. Just about every major chronic degenerative disease is helped by omega-3s because they change the very way in which inflammation is created in the body. This prevents the production of those chemicals, they're called inflammatory cytokines. It lowers bad cholesterol and it improves the good cholesterol. So many people are taking pills to try and get this done. And in fact, the best way to raise your good cholesterol is fish oil. B vitamins, that's another thing that you need to manage inflammation. Why? Because we lower a lot of the chemical products that, again, create inflammation. If you don't have adequate B vitamins, your body can't break these things down. And so this actually helps the way our body manages inflammation. And then another one that I'm a really big fan of is something called serrapeptase. What serrapeptidase is it's a special anti-inflammatory enzyme. So we just talked about enzymes for the digestion of our food. This is a different one. You take this one on an empty stomach. You don't take it with food because what it actually does is it breaks down the proteins that are involved with inflammation. So there are fats involved with inflammation and there's protein involved with inflammation. And what serrapeptidase does is it's actually been shown to go in just as effective as most drugs for this very purpose. And it breaks down inflammation and stops inflammation without causing a bleed risk. And that's kind of the greatest. There's a lot of side effects with most anti-inflammatories. In fact, aspirin kills more people in North America every year than HIV does. Okay, a lot of people don't know this, but aspirin actually causes intestinal bleeding. And it's a very big problem, especially in the senior community. And so what we found is that there's actually an anti-inflammatory enzyme that can do better than that without having the side effect. And so this is why I've become such a big fan of it, because when you look at cardiovascular disease, one of the easiest ways to limit heart disease or cardiovascular disease is to lower the inflammation in the system. And then, of course, we need to nourish. So we need to build back everything. So now we've gone through years of basically beating our body up by eating foods we're sensitive to. We finally got it cleansed. We've balanced our pH. We've created healthy digestion. We've brought in all the protein. We've brought in everything our body needs to heal. Now we need to heal the rest of it. One of the easiest ways you can do this, because what we're going to see, the things you need, people who've seen my gluten-free presentation before have seen this. These tend to be the main things that most people are deficient in. And what we find are the omega-3 fats, again, needed to manage inflammation. Part of the reason for this is even the way we produce food nowadays, we create meat that has higher levels of omega-6s than it used to. So when you grass feed a cow, for instance, the amount of omega-6 to omega-3 is about 1.5 to 1 is the ratio. When you corn feed it, it's about 6 to 1. So what ends up happening is you create a more inflammatory fat, which makes it harder for you. So when you then eat it, your body has a better tendency to become inflamed. And so this is where you see a big push at a lot of the supermarkets towards what we call traditionally raised. The reason behind that is it actually lowers the inflammation. So what you're trying to do is increase that ratio or improve that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s. So one of the ways to do that is if you're taking in a lot of omega-6s, you need to take in additional omega-3s to balance it out. So you need to add extra omega-3s to balance it that 6 to 1 ratio. Then the other things you need, A, D, E, and K, your folic acid, your B12, your iron, and your calcium. So one way you can get a lot of these things is usually through a good multivitamin. And again, it needs to be good, and we'll talk about some of the key things that you're looking for in it. Because again, there's a lot of multivitamins out there on the market. And my one sort of warning with most of them is it's kind of the nutritional equivalent of a cranberry. A lot of them have dosages that are just so low that you're not really getting much out of them. And the other thing is they've got like these sort of hard candy coatings almost and a shiny layer of shellac. And just like those calcium pills I spoke about earlier, I actually know a guy who works in the janitorial field. And he sells porta potties to construction sites is what he does. And he was doing a sales call to a big condo building in Toronto one day. And the manager there asked him, he says, he's like, I've always wondered, he's like, this weird thing, why do men throw their vitamins out? He says, what do you mean? He goes, like, why do men throw them in the toilet? The guy says, well, like, what are you talking about? He says, well, I keep finding, like, when I have to basically empty out the porta potties, they go through a filter, and the filter keeps picking up these little pills. And he says, well, how do you know they're vitamins? Because the name was still seen written on them. And he had to explain, he said, like, those aren't, like, that's not stuff that's been thrown in. He goes, those are being swallowed and just not broken down and digested. And so this is where I typically will try and push people towards getting, you know, a powder or a capsule or something that's very easy to digest, because sometimes, especially if you've got poor digestion, if you don't have the acid, you can't dissolve that candy coating, and then you can't get at all the good nutrients inside. This is often why I look for, you know, go with a capsule or go with a powder, and part of the reason behind that is the vitamins are a lot more easy to liberate, and you don't have to worry about the digestion as much. So you want to make sure that it provides B12, but as methylcobalamin. That's a good key feature to look for, because most B12 is a different form, and the trouble with that is most people can't absorb it. So the kind of B12 found in most multivitamins, most people can't absorb. Vitamin B6 is P5P. This is another key. So this is where I know we're getting a little technical, and we're getting into a little bit of the niche parts of vitamin science. But B6 is the way in which it's sold most of the time is not how it's used. The way in which your body uses pyridoxal acid is as pyridoxal 5-phosphate. And so a lot of the times, if you're taking one that's not that type, you can be losing up to 80% of it in conversion. So you could be taking 100 milligrams of the stuff and only actually getting 20. And so it really changes how your body can use it. And again, vitamin K, you want to make sure it's MK7. Now this one is not because other vitamin Ks aren't good. It's actually because Health Canada only allows a maximum amount of vitamin K in a vitamin. And most vitamin Ks, vitamin K you need a large amount of. But Health Canada doesn't let us put it in there. So you need the right type in order to be active. And this is also vitamin K2. So people with clotting issues don't need to worry as much. There's two types of vitamin K, and this is why Canada limits them, is because it doesn't actually make a differentiation between K1, which is for clotting, and K2, which is actually for bone health. So normal production of your bones requires K2. And the trouble is most vitamins have very, very low levels of this, and we naturally get vitamin K from fermentation. It's basically, we get it in our environment from eating rotten food. So when was the last time you guys ate rotten food? Didn't think so. I see somebody pointing at one another down here, but I won't ask. Oh, fermented is different, slightly different than rotten. But again, that's actually a good source of vitamin K, is fermented food. I'm very big on fermented, mainly because it provides more available nutrients. And then the other key that I always say is look for something that has a bit of a whole food base, or has some sort of plant material in it. And this is a weird one, but what we found, and we don't understand why, is when you actually blend vitamins with some sort of plant matter, the body absorbs it better. And again, we don't understand entirely the concept, other than it just seems to have those right cofactors, those correct little chemicals that allow for better absorption. So B vitamins, I'm a huge fan of. I take mine every single day. Why? Because it clears brain fog, promotes the metabolism of macronutrients. So if you want to burn fat, you need the right vitamins to do so. Provides, basically all your B vitamins. Supports impaired liver function and intestinal function. It improves mental clarity and memory, reduces stress. And what I find is most people tend to be deficient in at least one or more. So I always tend to recommend taking a complex so that you know you're getting all the B vitamins. The nice thing with them is they're very, very safe, and you'll excrete any excesses that you do take. So you'll make sure you have an adequate level in your body, and any extra comes out as neon yellow urine. So if you've ever wondered why after you take vitamins your urine is bright yellow, that's the B vitamins coming through, folks. Interesting fact, they are being absorbed. They're not being wasted. In order to get into your pee, they have to go through your blood to get there first. Most people say, well, don't you just pee vitamins out? And the answer is yes, you do just pee vitamins out after they've been used. So your body's had a chance to use them. Your body's had a chance to take them, to replenish its stores, to use them as antioxidants and get rid of toxic byproducts, and then it gets rid of the rest. And that's okay. It's okay to have bright yellow urine. In fact, I've seen some people who were very sick, and interestingly, we gave them B vitamins. And about 3-4 weeks after I saw them, they called my office very panicked. And they said, "Doc, my urine has suddenly gone bright yellow." And I said, "Oh, did you just get the vitamins?" They said, "No, I've been taking them religiously for like 3 weeks now." They must have had such a deficiency that it took them 3 weeks before they'd rebuilt up their stores that they were actually starting to excrete the thiamine and B3. So I'd never seen that before. Because almost everybody, you take a B vitamin, and you can tell by looking at your urine you've taken a B vitamin. But that person actually took them a while. Then you need your fat-soluble nutrients. These are some of the most important. Vitamin D. So you guys all live in Canada, unless somebody's here on vacation. In which case, why are you here seeing me if you're in Canada on vacation? There's better things to do. Vitamin D, if you all live in Canada, on behalf of Health Canada, take vitamin D. They don't even test it in Ontario in people anymore. They just assume you are deficient. So it's no longer standard to test somebody's vitamin D. And the reason we took that away from being standard is everybody is deficient. So we just have to tell you now, take vitamin D. We don't get enough sun, in case you haven't noticed. So because of that, we actually need to supplement. Vitamin K, I talked about this one a little bit before. It's really, really, really important for bone health. It actually also has some interesting immune system functions. And then again, our omega-3 oils, I'm a huge, huge fan of those. So in summary, what we're looking at, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to cleanse. We're going to do 7-day detox. Why? Because we need to get rid of all the stuff that's slowing us down. Part of that is, using something like a chlorella or a spirulina or some sort of greens to really help improve the detoxification of the system, to bind up those toxins and eliminate them. Then we need to rebalance our pH. Why? Because our system only works at the correct pH. And so part of the whole step that we're doing is to really basically prevent the development of further disease so that our system can heal. We need to repair and rebuild our body, so we need to give it the tools it needs for making the proteins. Protein is the basic structure of everything. Pretty much every chemical reaction in your body has an enzyme that helps it work. Enzymes are made of protein. Pretty much every piece of your body is in some way held together by protein. Most of the chemicals you use to communicate in your body are some form of protein. So this is why it's so important that we have the adequate tools we need to rebuild these proteins. Next, we need to support digestion. So the way we do this, we need adequate enzymes, but we also need the right environment for them to work. Okay, I'm not going to give you guys the crash course in grade 9 and 10 chemistry again, and you probably didn't enjoy it the first time, but really what's important there is chemical reactions occur at the right pH. And so what you need to make sure is you have the right pH, you have the right enzymes, because what happens in your intestines is sort of the most beautiful complex chemistry known. It's organic chemistry at its finest. Next, we heal the inflammation. Why? Because we want to stop this problem. We don't want it to come back. So ways we do that is we use the omega-3s, we use the B vitamins as cofactors, and then we also use the anti-inflammatory enzyme, that's serratia peptidase, or sometimes you'll see it just called serratia peptase. Either is technically correct. And then last thing you want to do is nourish your body. So that's making sure that you get all the correct nutrients that your body needs in order to heal. So I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to me ramble and rant tonight. I hope you were able to learn something. For those of you who've seen me speak before, I hope this time around you learned something new and that it was valuable to you. And I'm going to be standing up here to take a few questions now. That's correct. Yeah.
In regards to food intolerance, do you recommend at all I think it's called the IgG, which is a food blood intolerance testing, to find out rather than doing the process of elimination?
Yeah, like the question was, do I recommend IgG testing for food intolerances? I do a lot of those in my office, and a big part of them is, with any test, it is not, when it's all said and done, it is not the law, it is not 100%, there is no test out there that is. What I find with them is they are very specific and they are very sensitive. So they will catch a lot of food intolerances. You may find that you remove those foods, you may bring some of them back and it doesn't actually affect you, where you may find the removal of other foods that are caught by this test has a profound effect. One of the first patients I did it with was a celiac, and that's how we discovered it. And it was interesting because I was suspicious she was celiac. We convinced her to go gluten-free, but she got mostly better. But she was actually also really allergic to sweet potatoes and spinach. And when she finally cut those foods, that's when she had pretty much complete resolution. And it was one of those rare allergies that you almost never see. And I think had we not done that test, she would have got, mostly better, but not completely better. So it can be a great tool. We did it with my wife, and she's nastily sensitive to dairy. We are 2 peas in a pod, and she came back not sensitive according to the test. So her reaction to dairy is just, in our minds, it's modulated by a different process than IgG, because again, IgG is one of 5 types of antibodies. You've got IgA, IgM, IgG, IgE, IgI, and because of that, like for instance, if they're looking for celiac disease, they're testing IgA antibodies. When they're doing a skin scratch test, they're testing IgE antibodies. And so because of that, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but I've found that for like the money that it costs for most of those tests is probably the best money you'll spend on your healthcare, because it's going to lead you to things you can avoid that are going to make you feel a lot better, as opposed to necessarily things you have to add, which tends to be more expensive in the long run.
What about the almond milk?
Almond milk is fine, yeah. The almond milk, soy milk, rice milk, coconut milk, hemp, flax. There's a million of them out there. There's chia milk now. You'll notice they never say milk on them. They always say like beverage, almond beverage, hemp beverage. They're not a true milk. They don't quite do the exact same thing, but they're all fortified, because any food in Canada you use as a substitute for another food, you have to fortify it to provide the same nutrients. And so it's interesting that actually most sort of fake milks are actually better sources of calcium, because they usually have it in a source that in a form that's more absorbable. And so it's interesting how a lot of these like substitute products for certain things can actually be better.
So the coconut milk and the almond milk is like a fake milk?
Yeah, it's fake milk. But they don't have breasts.
Yeah, I know. But they're good milk.
Yes. They're absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with them at all. No, I drink them quite right. I drink coconut milk every morning.
And the juice you had with the aloe vera there, can you take it from the plant itself, the aloe vera?
Oh, no, and good question. So the juice from the aloe vera, can you take it directly from the plant? I apologize if I overlooked this one point. No, you typically want to buy a commercial preparation of aloe vera juice. And here's the thing. Now, technically, you can take it directly from the plant. Aloe has a chemical in it called aloin, which is a very potent laxative. So you just have to see how aloin affects your body when you take it that way. I'm pretty insensitive to it. I've experimented, but it doesn't seem to work that way for myself. But
it won't hurt you if you try.
Oh, it won't hurt you, but it'll create some urgency for some people. And depending on how violent a reaction you have, it could be not comfortable. But yeah, no, and commercial aloe, I'm not sure which one you have at National. Lily, that's what I was gonna say. The Lily of the Desert is the one that I've got in my fridge at home, and it's what it is it's had the aloin removed, so it doesn't have that strong laxative effect. It just has that soothing and healing effect without creating the urgency.
Can you use apple cider vinegar with the mother in it with the aloe instead of lemon?
Yes, for people who didn't like lemon. The question was, could you use apple cider vinegar with mother? So with mother is the apple cider vinegar that looks like somebody sneezed into it. It's got the little floaties in the bottom. That's what that refers to. That's the original sort of bacterial colony that was used to create the vinegar. And in a way, it's like a probiotic. So I always recommend always buy apple cider vinegar with mother. And you can, and the question was, can you use it in substitute for lemon juice in that recipe? Yes, you can. Pretty much you could use any acid. If you wanted balsamic vinegar, technically it would work. Probably kill your taste buds, but it would work. Apple cider vinegar would be much better. Lime juice will also substitute. Grapefruit juice, a little bit less acidic, but yeah, lime or lemon will work. Apple cider vinegar will work. So there are a variety of options there.
What should you know about National Nutrition?
They're really friendly, really wonderful, and really caring people, and they are very cutting edge and really concerned with education.